I'm so glad that you all are here. Welcome. So this is our follow-up webinar. So last week we had this wonderful opportunity to hear from the map makers, explain their choices, explain kind of the challenges of map making. And this time we're going through a process where they talk about, well, what if we were to change this? And what are the trade-offs? And what are some of the kinds of challenges that we have? And then before we do that, I wanted to do this thing I've been waiting to do. I wanted to draw out winners of our raffle. So these are folks who submitted maps, and they didn't win. They're not our top winners, but they definitely deserve a prize. Okay, so for our first one, we have John Henderson. Thank you, John Henderson, for submitting a map. All right, taking it out of this guy. Okay. Our next one is Oscar Gerschfeld. All right, Oscar. And then we have Michelle Hendricks and Rob Thompson. Y'all are being so patient as this happens. All right, let's see. Tyler Griesenbrock and Luke Nelson. And then I wanted to highlight that we decided that what we would do is that we were going to give one to the youngest map maker. And the youngest map maker at all of 12 years old was Lorelei Wise. So Lorelei will also get a gift certificate. And I just wanted to let you know how much I appreciate all the folks who took time to actually create maps. Now, I also want to remind you that the Ohio Redistricting Commission received the winning maps from the map makers that are here to talk to you today. But it's also really cool that if you go to the Ohio Redistricting website, what you will find is that there are 67 congressional maps that have been submitted by just ordinary folks, folks that care about fair districts. And so we are really living in a very different time. And I just wanted to welcome you all. So one, I want to encourage you to put your name and to put where you're from into the chat. Two, we are all going to have a bunch of questions. So put those in the chat. And I also wanted to highlight that Suzanne Almeida is here, and she is going to be asking the questions this time. So asking the questions to the map makers. So she'll be receiving questions that you have from the chat, and she'll ask questions. Suzanne Almeida is from Common Cause. She is the Redistricting and Representation Council for Common Cause. And she'll be asking all sorts of good questions. So make sure you put your questions into the chat. I'm so glad so many of you are here today. And with that, I'm going to hand this over to Chris Cusack. Now, Chris Cusack is a professor emeritus from Keene College in New Hampshire. And he is going to walk us through how the competition worked and a little bit about what the map makers have done. And welcome all.
Great, thank you, Catherine. And thanks for everyone for being here. I think what we're doing is modeling how the process should go. And we've had our winners, and they presented their maps last week at a webinar, and many of you attended then. And we're happy to have you back, and any newcomers as well. And so these are the three winning maps. And what we're going to do is, over the course of the week, and also from last week's webinar, the winners got some feedback, got some comments, got some suggestions and questions. And today they're sort of reacting to those. So I'm going to show, if we do these changes to the maps, then this happens, and so on and so forth. And that's really how the process should go in a legal manner for the state of Ohio. And so with that, I'm just going to sort of remind ourselves what the winning maps in their original form look like. And I'm sure our contestants, our three first place winners, will show these as well. But we looked at point totals using Dave's redistricting. And that was sort of to help organize the number of submissions that we had, some very, very fine maps. But ultimately, the maps went to the advisory committee And that was a really rich discussion, a lot of thoughtful conversation. And so it didn't just depend on point totals to determine first and second and third place. It also looked at, how are the maps designed? What about communities of interest? All sorts of things, detailing the very rich demography and geography of Ohio. And so this is John Hagner's map. John is our first place winner. He's from Yellow Springs, Ohio, and has spent nearly 2 decades working on campaigns and working for political organizations. John, interestingly, right now is managing Nan Whaley's campaign for governor. And this is why I put this out there, because I didn't know, I'm from New Hampshire. I didn't know who John Hagner was. And none of the advisory board members did either, because it was kept completely anonymous. And so they didn't know who these maps were submitted by. So this is the first place map. And John received some feedback last week and will explain some changes or possible changes that could be done. Our next map, it was second place, is from Paul. If we can, we'll just go to the next map, Paul Neves. Paul is from Yonkers, New York, and also was one of our 3 finalists in the Ohio Senate and House mapping competition. So has done an excellent job. He labels himself an amateur map maker, but he makes some very professional looking maps and does a very excellent job, and has spent nearly a decade working with Dave's Redistricting app. And so has really done nice work here. And so has finished in second place. And again, he's got some feedback, and we'll discuss changes to his map and what that might mean moving forward. And then our third place winner is Riley Jones, is a graduate student studying structural engineering, so wonderful, out in California right now, but is from Loveland, Ohio, and grew up in Ohio, attended the Ohio State University. And so lots of people on the advisory commission, looking at these maps, had a lot of positive things to say. And this is especially in comparison to your existing map in the state of Ohio. And we can see their point total is, at least 150% fewer points than any of these 3 maps. So they've done a great job, and they've taken in some feedback and consideration over the course of the past week. And we're very excited to see, what some of the response and some of the results are. So with that, I'll just we'll allow John to share his screen, and we'll have him walk through a little bit of how he made some changes and what some of the questions he received were. And I thank John and Paul and Riley for participating in last week's webinar and agreeing again to participate today. Appreciate it very much.
Yes, thanks so much. Ooh. Can folks see my screen? Can I get a thumbs up? Excellent. As Chris mentioned, I am a partisan fellow in my day job, but I took a lot of pride in drawing what I think is a nonpartisan map here. If I were to set out to draw a gerrymandered map for Democrats, I certainly could do that. It's not an impossible thing to do. But that's not what we've got here. I think this is a map that ordinarily would send more Republicans to Congress than Democrats, which isn't what I wish that Ohio voters wanted, but it is most of the time what Ohio voters want. And I think on ordinary circumstances, this map would send 6 or 7 Democrats to Congress and 8 or 9 Republicans, which is in line usually with what the partisan preferences of Ohio are, although everyone is welcome to try to change that. What I'm really proud of on this map is that it's reflective of Ohio's partisanship in a lot of different ways. It's easy to look at the Dave's Redistricting app, which tends to default to presidential results. And most people working in, one of the nice things about the democratization of these redistricting tools is it lets people draw maps from states they've never been to. And since we don't always understand the nuances of a Senate race or a gubernatorial race, it's easy to default to the presidential. But one thing I think that is strong about the map that I submitted is that of the last 4 statewide campaigns in Senate and governor and presidential, this map has a lot of split districts. 5 of these districts voted for some Democrats and some Republicans in the last 4 regular elections. Most of the time, what we're seeing is that there are Sherrod Brown Donald Trump districts. But given that Ohio is a Sherrod Brown Donald Trump state, I think that's reflective and that's valuable. I think when we talk about the partisan impact of maps, it's really important to ask yourself, well, what kind of partisanship are we talking about? And what does that mean here? So what you see on the screen now is the original map that I submitted. I worked really hard to get the population variance down as low as possible. The Dave's redistricting app will accept anything up to, I think, 0.75. That's not a number that has any basis in the law. There's no one has said you can go this far, but no further. On the Ohio state legislative districts, there is a number in the law. There's a 5% variance is allowed. There isn't one for Congress. So what Dave's is doing is sort of looking at some recent court cases, but there's not a lot of precedent on that. And there have been federal judges that require 0 population deviance. So 0 or 1 off of the norm. So I drew this trying to get to that 0 number because that is a standard some judges have imposed. Other ones have put a little bit more flexibility. West Virginia doesn't divide counties between congressional lines, and judges there have allowed slight preferences, deviation, but only if you keep whole counties. So I tried to keep that. There were 2 main areas of feedback on my map, which I really appreciated everybody who did. I switched screen over to a doc where I'm working on trying to incorporate that feedback. I'll start in Franklin County, where there was some commentary about splitting towns, specifically Gehanna and Westerville. So I went in here to try to fix that. And I think overall, it makes the map a little bit better. I'll overlay the city lines here, and you can see in this feedback map, I put all of Westerville into the Northern Suburban District and all of Gehanna into the Northern Suburban District. The reason I didn't originally do that is because the southern part of Gehanna has a large African-American population, and specifically Somali American immigrant population. So you're presented with a choice when you're making redistricting trade-offs, right? So you can see that the community of interest to be preserved is Gehanna as a town, as one perfectly valid way of looking at it. Or you could decide that the community of interest that needed to be protected was the Somali American community, which should be kept whole in one district where possible, which is another perfectly acceptable way to look at it. There isn't, the law doesn't say one of these is better than the other. So these districts and the precincts in Southern Gehanna, which are more diverse than the rest of the city, I think if you were to poll everybody in those districts, they'd give you different answers as to how they think of their community, right? It may be that the city line is really important, or it may be that it's not. And I think that's the something that the map makers are going to have to just figure out where they wanted to draw that line. So in this feedback case, I moved all of Gehanna into the same district based on the feedback from folks who joined in. What that means is compared to the original, you've got to bring the southern district, the one that's all Franklin County, further closer to Hilliard, which means that these voters over here who probably think of themselves as being more connected to Hilliard or Upper Arlington instead get put in a district with the rest of Columbus. I don't think that's the end of the world, but it is the trade-off. So if you want to take Westerville and Gehanna as areas that need to be kept together, you end up splitting other communities. In this case, it's unincorporated parts of townships outside Columbus might be easier to do. Overall, what this change does is it makes the 3rd district very slightly whiter, and it makes this 15th district very slightly less democratic, but we're talking about fractions of a percent here. So, wouldn't change most normal outcomes in most races, but it's definitely possible. The other piece of feedback that I got was about Stark County, and I think this is a harder nut to crack. So I'm going to pull up and try and get around the same, turn off city lines, try to get about the same space between, this is my original map. What the original map was trying to do in Northeast Ohio, it starts with wanting to create a Cuyahoga County only majority African-American district. So that's what the 11th looks like. Once you make that choice, you have consequential choices. I didn't want to split Summit County or Stark County, but the two of them together is much too large for a single district. So you have to, if you don't want to split either county and you can't combine them, then they both have to anchor their own districts. And the 14th, is stuck up in the corner, so it doesn't have a lot of options. Trumbull County and Mahoning County have a lot of cultural similarities. They are an integrated metropolitan area, so I didn't want to divide them. So if you keep those together, you just kind of quickly run out of choices. So if you want to keep these together, and Ashtabula and Lake County have to go somewhere, that sort of adds up. And then you can put, Portage County and Summit County are very integrated together. And then you need a few more voters, which you can get here in Geauga, which then puts the 7th in. And the point has been raised very correctly that, Canton and Medina don't have a lot of correlation. They don't have a ton to do with each other. But they kind of don't have better homes to go to. I tried to take some of the feedback that was offered about keeping, putting Canton in with Akron. That means you have to split Stark County, or you could split Summit County, which I think goes against what some people in the community might choose. But you can put together a district there that certainly works. The problem is the corresponding choices. If you take the 11th, which is a Cuyahoga only African-American district, and then you take the 13th like this, you're building a long vertical line down Northeast Ohio, which can't easily be crossed. So to get to the 14th to the population that it needs, you've got to break the Mahoning Valley up and put Trumbull County in a different county than Mahoning County, which is certainly a legal choice, possible. You can do it. I'm not sure that it's a strong choice. I don't know if it improves the map. You then also end up with this 7th district that starts getting a little swoopy. Chris showed the existing lines, which are terrible and crazy, but part of why they're terrible and crazy is to accomplish various things like this, where you have to make, connections between places without a lot of options. This map here, we certainly could be passed. I would want to go through and balance out the populations a little bit more carefully. You can see we're 228 people off. You can reassign blocks. It gets a little bit tedious, but one of the things I think it's worth pointing out is precincts are not very logical geographic areas in most cases. Like, look at this precinct that you can see highlight. Has 4 non-contiguous chunks. It gets very, very messy very quickly. So part of why there are so many split precincts in my map is because you can actually make cleaner and more logical lines if you break up some of these absurd gerrymandered precincts to get them all to balance. But yeah, I think if the choice has to be made between combining Akron and Canton in a single district or combining Warren and Youngstown in a single district, I think that's a hard choice that has to be balanced. I could, people definitely could have different opinions on which is the preferable option. And I know some of the other map makers who worked on this are going to have different takes on this. But as I was trying to figure it out, I could either make an Akron Canton district or a Warren Youngstown district. And I thought that putting Warren and Youngstown together and then not splitting either Summit or Stark is the most rational option. So yeah, I think if we were modeling how this would really work in the real world, I think I would definitely say the suggestions in Franklin County improve the map, and we should absolutely adopt them. I'm not sure that the suggestions in Northeast Ohio do, but yeah, I think it would be an interesting thing to have a more functioning redistricting commission examine in detail. So I'm happy to take a break here. Suzanne, I don't know if there are any questions from the chat that you want to surface.
So I don't see any questions for the chat, but thank you so much for doing this. I do have a kind of a question that's more philosophical. And as you were talking, one of the things that you said that really jumped out at me is, when we're looking at locations that may not have a lot to do with each other, we're not just looking about whether or not we put those two locations together. We're also looking if they have a better home somewhere else. And I think that really comes down to kind of the core of the redistricting process, right? Like this is all trade-offs. These are all decisions. There isn't one right answer. I'm curious if there are other parts of your map. I think you mentioned this in the Northeast Stark County area. Are there other parts in your map where you kind of had to make that trade-off where you're saying, look, like these may not be, these two locations may not have a ton to do with each other, but there's no better place to put them?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I moved the cursor down to show this second district, I think, is a great example of that. Warren County and Claremont County make a lot of sense together as a district. And Madison County, Pickaway, Fayette, Ross County make a lot of sense together as a district. These two halves are quite distinct, right? You've got the Cincinnati metro area, the Columbus metro area, you've got suburban, exurban here, pretty rural here, but there's not a more obvious home. If you want to keep most of Appalachia together in a district, the sixth needs to look a lot like this. If you want to keep the Miami Valley together with Greene County, where I live, Montgomery County and Springfield, that kind of looks like this. If you want a Franklin County only seat, a Hamilton County, you end up with sort of two halves that don't add up to a full district. It would be possible, and some people, I think Riley's map makes the choice to put Butler County and Warren County together, but Butler, Warren, and Claremont is too big. So you need to cut somebody off there. And then if you do that, you end up with a district that kind of sprawls all over southwestern Ohio. Again, totally defensible and doable. The reason that I chose to do Butler County in a different county than Warren is that's the way the current map is, that for the last couple decades of Ohio congressional maps, those two counties have been separate, which means that, at least as of now, they don't expect to necessarily be together. So I figured we would keep that. But yeah, this second district is not my favorite. And the 8th district's not my favorite either, with sort of rural farmland and suburbia, but there's no really easy way, given where various cities are placed, to get around it.
Great, thank you so much. So I have a couple additional questions for you. So staying in kind of the Stark County area, I'm wondering if you look at the current map, right? The current map puts together Stark, Mahoning, Trumbull, and then runs kind of the Northeast County into Cuyahoga County. Is there a reason that you chose not to do something similar? Is this a population growth issue? Is this some other factor? Communities of interest, maybe? What made you change the way that district is currently configured?
So it's currently configured to, it's in sort of a gerrymandered mess that was, done for very partisan reasons. So I wanted to unpack that and start putting together whole counties wherever possible. The current 11th district drops into downtown Akron to pick up African-American voters, and combines two really distinct cities in one. I don't think that's the way that the map should be drawn. I think that's we can do a lot better than that. So once you decide to keep Summit County whole, a lot of other pieces fall into place. But yeah, one of the challenges when you start trying to connect Canton to the Mahoning Valley is that you build a line that you can't get around. That with the Pennsylvania border here and the lake here, you don't have a lot of options to swing around, and you've got to fit whole districts into what's left. So you really need to start drawing in the upper right hand corner in Ashtabula and fill it in, just because there's nowhere else to take it.
Great. Thank you so much for that explanation. So I have one more question. And then we're going to move on to our next map. I think, can you just zoom in and give us a little bit of a closer view on Hamilton County, the Cincinnati area, and talk to us about the choices you made there, particularly as it relates to kind of the communities of interest and how you understand those to be positioned?
You bet. So Hamilton County, I thought it was important to draw a Hamilton County only district that would keep all of obviously Cincinnati intact, but also its closest in suburbs. Where I drew the line is you go into Western Hamilton County, things get much more rural quite quickly. Once you get past Delhi Township, once you get past Addiston, things start to get feel very different. It feels much less urban and suburban and more exurban and rural. So the city of Cincinnati has this long tail that I wanted to follow. And then there's a few more suburban areas like Cleves and Addiston. But then after that, I picked off the more rural townships, and then I was looking to get very close to a zero population deviation. So part of where some of the lines get drawn is because that's where you can, get to the perfect level of balance. But I wanted to keep urban and suburban Hamilton County together and separate out rural and exurban. So I think I did a decent job with that, but people who are more expert in Cincinnati and in Hamilton County, I've been to all 88 counties in Ohio. I have not been to all municipalities yet. I'm not sure I've ever been to Miami Heights. This may not be the perfect line here, but I know that these areas are much more rural.
Great. Thank you so much. I think we are out of time for this segment, but I do want to highlight that keep your questions coming in the chat, please. We can continue to have this conversation. I'm sure we will have time kind of as we discuss the other maps. So I am going to say thank you so much to John, who I know is tuning in from vacation. So bonus points for that, and toss it back to Chris.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah, I'm actually in New Hampshire. I live in New Hampshire. And so welcome to John to our beautiful state. And very impressive that John's been to all 88 counties. And I think it's interesting as well, John living in Ohio and Riley an Ohio native, and Paul, our second place finisher here, living in New York, and just shows some of the richness of mapping capabilities using Dave's Redistricting and some of the other mapping software platforms that would look at demography and geography and everything to make a very, very competitive map. And so we're going to turn it over to Paul here, and he's going to explain some of the changes he made to his map based on feedback and comments that we've received last week's webinar and over the course of the week. So thank you, Paul.
Can everyone hear me? I was having some trouble. All right. So I have a few different versions that I made to show how some changes would affect the rest of the map. So this is the original map that I presented from last week, just so everyone can see and remember. I want to thank everyone for providing the feedback, which was helpful in understanding different perspectives. The maps I'm presenting show what some of the requested changes could look like and how they could affect other districts. It's important to remember that multiple legal aspects have to be met, like the equal population, protection of minority groups, compactness and contiguity, which regards splitting of counties and municipalities. Additionally, the district plan should be fair or proportional. For example, trading one county for another may improve one district, but this could affect the district's population total, the compactness, the partisanship, and then could upset some other voters or other communities that weren't upset otherwise. And if you want to get the population deviation down to zero, some cities, towns, or communities are going to be split. So even small changes in one district can affect every other district. So taking a look at map 1, it's quite a dramatic change from the original. Some of the feedback wanted Ashtabula, Trumbull, Mahoning, and Columbiana counties together, and to remove Lake County from the district. You get a much more cohesive district in the 13th, but it has to expand obviously to get to population total that it needs. So I move into Portage. Portage is pretty close to what that 13th needs. Obviously, the 13th district has to go somewhere. So I headed west. This does change its partisanship, moving it to the right significantly, and it matches the 10th district. But it remains competitive, but much less so. But you see what happens to the neighboring districts, like 4, 6, and 14. Some of the other feedback wanted to keep Stark whole and perhaps grouped with a more urban county, even if not kept whole. So in this version, 6 does remain compact, and it does include all of Stark County and most of Summit County. It does split Summit now, which may dissatisfy some people north of Akron or across the county. The 6 remains competitive, although it does move to the right also. The composite score shows that it's politically even. If you look at this section here, it's 1.1% difference. The 14th now does group Lake and most of Geauga County, but their combined population is of course not enough for a single district. So it has to go somewhere. It can't come down into Portage anymore. So I do head it into Cuyahoga County, which does affect the 11th district. I did want to keep from splitting counties more than once. So the 11th does have to be, has to respect the Black communities in and around Cleveland. So it does remain plurality Black in this version, but the voting age population is now plurality white. It's probably okay, but the original map shows that a better district can be drawn that respects the area's Black communities. But back to the 14th, the district now wraps around the 11th. At least it doesn't split Cuyahoga again, which is what I did want to achieve. But you look at the 4th district, it takes in what's left in Portage and Summit, and then combines them with Lorain, Medina, Wayne, and part of Ashland in order to hit the population target. So you end up with a couple of good districts in their own right, like the 13th and the 6th. But the neighboring districts don't get any better, they get worse, which causes an overall reduction in the partisanship. Let me see if you can highlight the partisan lean moves. They're still somewhat competitive, but the overall map does take a hit in the partisanship, the proportionality. Still, no cities or towns are split in this region, so all of the changes do affect the rest of the map. I'll zoom back out. There was other feedback that concerned the splitting in Bellefontaine and Logan County, so I did keep that all together here. But some other counties are split now, Henry and Hardin. The 7th does wrap around a bit more, the 12th district, and splits Licking, Ashland, and Holmes. But the 12th does become a more suburban district. If I scroll over to the 15th, it's a large district now, but it stays in Appalachia. Finally, some of the feedback expressed a dislike over combining this part of the Cincinnati suburbs with Columbus suburbs. So I changed the 2nd and 8th district. Really, Madison and Pickaway counties shouldn't have been, or at least there was a feedback saying that they shouldn't be grouped with anywhere outside of Cincinnati. So the 8th district, instead of splitting Claremont, now splits Warren County, preventing the 2nd district from bordering Hamilton and the 1st district. This is just one way of doing this. We have a couple of different versions here. So you take a look at map 2, the 2nd district stays in the southwest, but splits Butler and Highland counties. It's a more compact district, but most of Butler, Cincinnati's northern suburbs and exurbs, is in a district that stretches far north. Licking and Fairfield and Pickaway counties are in, as well as part of Madison, are in the same district now, though. The partisanship overall is actually similar to the original map, but many of the districts are not particularly compact. If you take a look at map 3, this one brings back the Canton-Akron district, but keeps the 4th and 11th the same as the original map. This changes districts to 13 and 14, though, in the Northeast. Trumbull County is now divided, and it pushes the 14th further south. I do like the 7th district. It's a better North Central Ohio district. There was some feedback that preferred the counties around Franklin to be kept in 3 districts instead of 4. This map shows that, but you end up with less compact districts, including the 15th, which sort of wraps around the 3rd and the 12th, and splits Delaware County. Finally, map 4, I tried to reconcile all the best aspects of all the maps. In the Northeast, the District 14 is more compact and trades with the 13th, part of Mahoning and Columbiana counties for Geauga County. This doesn't change their partisanship from the original map either. It does, however, split the town of Boardman in Mahoning. The 6 doesn't take any of Appalachia and heads west. It is similar to the old 16th district that existed from 2002 to 2012. The Cincinnati suburban and exurban 8th district has changed, keeping most of Butler and Claremont together, which pushes the 2nd district away from Cincinnati. Logan is kept whole, so Bellefontaine is no longer split. The 12th district loses Morrow County for the more immediate suburbs of Columbus, and districts 1, 3, 4, 9, 10, and 11 are unchanged from my original version. And this map is also slightly more proportional at the cost of compactness and splitting. Obviously, there are a lot of different ways the map can be drawn up. What I displayed shows that changing just one district will affect many others. So while some changes may satisfy one group of people, the same changes may dissatisfy another group. The communities of interest are crucial in redrawing district boundaries, but there are legal constraints that can get in the way. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. And extra points for doing multiple iterations of the map. So I actually just kind of want to talk, while people are putting questions in the chat about regions of the map, I'm curious about your process here, right? Because one of the things that I think is particularly notable that you did is you did a number of different iterations, right? And then you kind of pulled them all together with the best of all worlds. Can you talk about kind of how that worked, what your thoughts were, what trade-offs you ultimately made in that map to combine the best pieces of your original map and all 3 other iterations?
Well, I usually draw, whenever I'm drawing up one of these, I usually draw a lot of different versions. The first version is usually never the one that I stick with. I look at other, excuse me, I look at other regional maps that may exist that say what part of the state is in where. I look online, and sometimes you see in Reddit, there's some different groups there that, just as an example, it's not that I'm on that site all the time, but I am trying to combine a lot of different aspects of what region is in what people are living where, which is obviously the most important piece. Where the people are living determines, how big a district can be, where the district can go, and still adhere to legal requirements. So, for instance, the 6th district here, I saw there was a comment trying to combine Stark, Mahoning, and Trumbull, which is a little too big for a district, so obviously you'd split one of them. It's not a bad district on its own, but I wouldn't do that because I don't think it's particularly compact. You're splitting fewer counties, but you end up with maybe not a compact district that I would think of doing. I don't know if does that answer? Or?
It absolutely does.
Okay.
And thank you so much for that. I think learning about the process and the choices is certainly important. And that kind of makes me wonder about kind of the criteria trade-offs, right? So you talked a lot initially about kind of ensuring that your population deviation was as close to 0 or 1 as possible. You talked just now about compactness and communities of interest. Can you point us to a couple places on your map where you're trying to balance, or where it was particularly a challenge to balance those multiple requirements to make your map constitutional and legal and all of that? I'd be curious to kind of dig in and see if folks have any questions about those balances.
The Southwest Cincinnati area, I would say, is one of the most challenging in this map. There's obviously Hamilton's too big, so it's going to end up being split. And then, as John said earlier, these 3 counties are too big for a district also. So at least one of them is going to be split. In this version, at least, it has 2, but I'm trying to keep in as much of the immediate outlying areas together. You have to have one whole county at least in every district. It's some decisions you don't like. You don't think that they're the best way of doing that, but you have to get you have to get the total population. You have to hit a target population, and then they have to be compact, and not in this area, but you do have to respect some communities and municipal boundaries, which are a bit strict in describing how to split them. But it is good that it has a way of addressing some of the wily lines that you may see across the state. I could go to Cleveland area, also trying to ensure that the Black voters here are not disenfranchised in any way really, and that it does constrain where you can go, how much you can combine with other areas, but you do have certain legal requirements that you have to meet. This one was less of a challenge, though. It did, at least from my perspective, you do only split the county 2 ways, and you do keep similar areas together.
Great. So I am going to look at a couple comments that have come in, and I'm just kind of, going to redo the comments, and I'm curious, it's like your rationale behind making these choices, right? So Julie says Paul's District 12 includes areas south and east of Franklin County that pull in a lot of rapidly growing diverse communities. She notes that this is an interesting trade-off with the split of the predominantly white suburbs on the northern edge. Can you talk a little bit about kind of your decision-making in that area?
Sure. I think it's this map that she's referring to.
I think so. Yes, that's correct. Julie, correct me in the chat if I am wrong.
Well, in this one, I try to respect the township and city boundaries everywhere, but in this case, let me put it on so you can see. Load. But there is a large non-white population in this district, which I was also trying to respect and coalesce into one neater looking district than the current third.
Swap spreadsheet.
Something.
Up here.
Doing something, but what's left over.
You are not speaking.
Full screen, and then I have to go into my.
I'm sorry. If you're not Paul,
Right.
Can you put
So,
yourself on mute?
We've been working to get law put in place.
Michelle, I think this is
illegal.
Pick yourself on mute, please.
Draw the maps, primarily considering politics. And the Republicans drew the last maps in Ohio, and the ones that are happening now.
Paul, you're going to have to unmute
Okay.
because I muted everybody.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. Thanks,
Thank you. So I was trying to keep in the non-white population in the Columbus area in one district that was neater than the current one, that respects the city boundaries and the township boundaries, that they're a little messy here, but which can make it a little difficult. But I was able to at least keep the town and most cities, except for Columbus, obviously, together. What's left over. I'm trying to combine that with the northern suburbs in Delaware, with what's left over in Franklin County. And in this version, I did go east into Licking to take the immediate suburbs. That was, whenever I draw districts, if there's large minority groups in a concentrated area, I do go into that first to make sure that those communities are respected.
Great. Thank you so much. And I think that is at our time. Before we move on, I'm going to toss it just briefly to either Chris or Catherine. There was a question in the chat that I think we need to address. So who decides which maps are going to be voted on? How is Ohio's map selected? 30 seconds or less.
Well, so one of the things that's interesting about the Ohio Constitution, so the congressional maps, we know that the state legislature, which had a deadline of September 30th, essentially ignored that deadline and held no hearings and essentially acted as if it wasn't in the Ohio Constitution. Now, the requirement was fairly stiff for the creation of a map, meaning that it would have to be a supermajority of both chambers plus 50% of both Democrats and Republicans. The way it is in the Ohio Constitution is the two major parties. What happens when that doesn't work? Of course, it goes off to the Ohio Redistricting Commission. And for many of us, we can't quite believe that here we are with 11 days until the deadline of October 31st for the Ohio Redistricting Commission. Now, what we do know is that when they were in the process of creating state legislative maps, there was a whole conversation about, well, how do we do this? How do you do a bipartisan map? And what we know is that the deliberation did not happen in public, that we got a 4-year map. We know, for example, on that day, that September 15th, that they came in at 10:30 in the morning and left, really very quickly, with less than 5 minutes, and saying, hey, they were going to go and work on the map. So we didn't see the kind of public conversation that would help us understand how they would come up with a bipartisan map. Now, we do know that the Senate Dems have introduced, there is a Senate map that has been introduced for consideration by the Democrats, but we do not know what the map from the chair, the Republican chair of the Ohio Redistricting Commission, might even look like. And so, one of the challenges right now is we know what could look better. We just had a whole conversation about kind of the trade-offs and, hey, well, if I do this, then there's this problem. How do you keep one community together, but then you end up having to split another? These are the kind of conversations that we should actually be seeing. And we really need, if there's any hope of bipartisan map making, at minimum, they have to get together. And so there is a Halloween. I know we all think the State House is scary. There's a Halloween deadline for the Ohio Redistricting Commission to create maps. If that doesn't work, it goes back to the state legislature. And they have until November 30th. They can create a 10-year map with a lower level is 30% of both Democrats and Republicans. So that's a lower buy-in from both political parties, or of course they could do another 4-year map. And so right now we need to urge that Redistricting Commission to get to work so that we can actually have some, at least, how can I put this, bipartisan conversation about what makes for a good map. And was that a very long answer to your question, Suzanne?
It was not. It was a very complete answer. So I think that is really good context as we move forward. And I'm going to toss it to Chris to introduce our third mapper.
Yes, thank you. In the interest of time, I think we're just going to have Riley share his screen and take it away. So I appreciate him being here with us all the way from California.
Thank you. Let's see. Is my PowerPoint working okay? Cool. So I made a PowerPoint because I made 2 maps in Dave's that took into account some of the feedback I got from my first map. So I'm just going to go through my original map and then the 2 new maps I made, pointing out some of the changes that I made. So this was my original map, just as a little refresher. And a brief flyover of it is that of these districts, 5 of them would be considered safely Republican. 1, this 10th district, would be a likely Republican district. 1 of them would be a likely Democratic district, which would be this 5th one. And then only 2 of them would be safely Democratic, the 13th and the 2nd. And this original map was only 4.2% disproportional in favor of Republicans. It had 3 districts which were competitive within 3 percentage points, and 1 district which was competitive within 5 percentage points. And that's based off a composite of the voting results from the 2016 to 2020 elections. And I think one of the pitfalls of my original map was that it had quite a few county splits. It split 14 counties 15 times. And so one of my primary objectives with these next maps that I will show you was trying to minimize some of these county splits, because I think it got pretty sloppy in some areas, particularly in this 1st district. And then up here in Northeast Ohio, I thought there could be a better way of preserving some of these communities of interest and the competitiveness of these districts, but also minimizing some of these county splits and rearranging counties in a way that perhaps looks nicer and makes a bit more sense. And so first I want to go through some minor changes and constants that I held in my maps going forward. So first of all, in this Cincinnati district, the left is my original map, and this image on the right is what the district looks like in both of my new maps. And this first iteration, I didn't realize this, but it didn't really follow municipal lines on its western end. So that was a really quick and easy fix. I just changed it. So now it very neatly follows municipal lines on this western edge. Doesn't really change the partisan breakdown of either district, but it's just kind of a quality of life improvement that makes it look nicer. Second change was between these 4th and 5th districts. Another quality of life improvement was I just filled in some of this area on the right end of Franklin County where this 5th district kind of like dips in and makes like a little arm. I just filled that in with the 4th district, and in exchange ate up some of the area under Hilliard with this 5th district. So again, doesn't really change the partisan breakdown of either district, but makes it look a little bit nicer and a little more compact. And finally, with this 1st district, which is anchored by Dayton, I eliminated the county split up here and instead took a little more out of Greene County right here, closer to Xenia. So now it consists of 2 whole districts and only splits 1 additional district. And something I want to note in these next 2 maps is that districts 1 through 5, so this green district, this purple district, both the Columbus districts and this Dayton district, and not shown here, but the district around Toledo, I kept the same because I didn't get much feedback on them. And I feel like that I drew them in a way that best represented my understanding of the community interests in the area. And so those were not my main area of focus. I kept those as is. And one of the primary suggestions for my maps was a lot of people wanted to see that Cuyahoga County only be split once because I split it twice in my original map. And so I experimented, and here was a map I came up with that's only split Cuyahoga once. And the result of this is that it eliminates the likely R district and puts it into a safe R category. So now there are 6 districts that are locked in as Republican in most election outcomes. It increases as a result, the disproportionality is increased ever so slightly to around 5%, and it reduces the competitiveness. Now, instead of having 3 districts within 3%, now there's only 1 district, and they still remain pretty competitive going into the 10% range. And this reduces some of the county splits. But I still found a few issues with this map. Primarily, I think it's really important that the Akron-Canton area are kept together in some way, shape, or form. And this district, they are severed entirely. One between Akron and the Summit County goes into the 12th district, and Canton goes into the 10th district with some of these rural and Appalachian counties. Some people mentioned that this line of counties here on the Pennsylvania border, Ashtabula, Trumbull, Mahoning, and Columbiana, should be kept in 1 district because they align sort of on this north-south axis and share a lot in common. But these regions are split between 2 districts. And another thing I explored, which maybe isn't the best way to arrange some of these districts, but was something I was willing to explore and could be an interesting thought, is if you look at my original map, I have the 7th district and the 8th district, which kind of split southeastern Ohio into 2. Instead, what I experimented with was creating the 7th district, which extends all along the Ohio River, and then creating these 2 kind of like clamshell districts that wrap around the Columbus area. So you have the 6th district, which is on the top, which actually already existed in some form in my previous map. And then this 8th district, which kind of wraps around some of the counties underneath it. Still keeps the partisan makeup of the state the same. It's just rearranging some of these rural and Appalachian counties, but it could make, that's why I think it's great to have some public feedback, because I don't know if this is the best way to do it, but I think it is certainly a way that could be explored. And so this is my like final revision that is my personal favorite. It still splits Cuyahoga twice, but in my opinion, I think that's the lesser evil in order to achieve some of what I think are important objectives when making a fair map in Ohio. In this case, when you split Cuyahoga twice, what you can have is Akron and Canton kept together in the 12th district. You can have those previously mentioned counties along the Western Pennsylvania border kept in a north-south axis. It does have to include some of these other counties in the Appalachian area just to meet the population requirement. And you can still have everything else kind of is rearranged the same way. And so unfortunately, the disproportionality of this map goes even higher to 7%. However, one district falls back into the likely R category rather than having 6 safe R. It has only 11 counties split 12 times. And I think it preserves the community of interests in the Northeast Ohio area the best, in my opinion. Cuyahoga County is split twice, but I think, that's kind of an acceptable trade-off, in my opinion, for accomplishing some of these things. And so just summing up some of the things I previously said, that 11th district might look a little egregious, splitting 2 counties. However, when you look at the municipal boundaries, it follows them nearly perfectly in both Summit and Cuyahoga County. And in a perfect world, we could have Cuyahoga County only split once, the Akron-Canton area is kept together, Ashtabula, Trumbull, Mahoning, and Columbiana counties are kept together, and the Cleveland Black community located at the eastern end of the county, all kept together in a perfect world. But unfortunately, one of these conditions in my experimentation has to be broken in order to satisfy the other 3. Going back to, it's a game of trade-offs between different conditions. And so of these, I thought that splitting Cuyahoga County twice was the lesser evil in order to accomplish my other objectives. And so that's kind of the motivation behind why I drew the lines the way I did.
Thank you so much for that, Riley. I'm going to encourage folks to put questions in the chat with the understanding that we are close to 1 p.m. And so we may not get to all of them, but I promise we will write them down and we will work on getting you answers. So Riley, I think one of my questions is around that Cuyahoga split, because that was an issue that you talked a lot about. When you dig into that, can you talk to us about kind of how that split falls, right? Where is it splitting? Does it make sense with the communities of interest on both sides of that split?
Yeah, so are you talking about when it's just split once?
Or twice, right? In your preferred map, right?
Yeah, so when I look at Cuyahoga County, I'm going back into Dave's redistricting real quick, and we'll put an overlay of the Black community. So you can see that it's the African-American community in Cuyahoga County is arranged in kind of this boomerang shape in the eastern edge. And what you encounter is if you want to split Cuyahoga County at all, which you have to because it's too populous, is that really the only way you can do it is by encompassing the city of Cleveland and then its east and then the eastern end of Cuyahoga County. That's really the only way you can do it. Otherwise, you're going to fracture the Black community between 2 districts. And so and you could see that in the other winners maps, is this is the only way. Or you can have this, you can have it kind of wrap around the whole district, have like an arm that goes around the outer areas of the county, but those are really the only ways to do it. And so in my map with 2 splits, what I did is, let's see. What I did is the areas that I cut off for this 11th district are the areas that are predominantly white here and on the very eastern edge of the county, and then also in the southern edge. I took off and put in with this 11th county. So that was the basis of the areas that I split from Cuyahoga County. But yeah, predominantly keeping the African American community together and with the municipal lines of the city of Cleveland, I thought was important.
Great. Thank you so much. And thank you to all of the mappers for having this incredibly important conversation. And I think, and Catherine will say this in a minute way better than I can, but this is really heartening that we can have this conversation, and really disappointing the Ohio Redistricting Commission cannot, right? The level of detail, the level of discussion, the level of understanding demonstrated not just by the mappers, but by the questions coming in today is really extraordinary. And so I'm just going to toss it to Catherine to bring us home.
I just wanted to say thank you so much for joining us. I think it is amazing that our map makers took not just the time to create maps for the competition, but spent time to think about, well, what is it that you could do to change them? And like, what are the trade-offs? And how do you figure out how to actually create maps that would work for the most people, for most people? And I think there's some real challenges in leaving map making until the very last minute, because the maps simply get better when we have an opportunity not just to provide public input, but also to provide an opportunity to understand when, for example, our suggestions are not taken into account. Like, there's an opportunity to better understand our congressional maps if we actually participate in a conversation about them. And it's just incredibly disheartening that we're not participating in a truly transparent, functional discussion about our upcoming congressional maps. Now, I would highly encourage you, because I don't know about you, but I am super duper irritated. We have 11 days yet left. They haven't actually convened the Ohio Redistricting Commission. Every day at noon, and I should say work days, we are meeting at the State House. In this case, we're at the 77 South High. That's that State and High corner. Basically to call on the map makers to do their job. And then on the 28th, we are going to have a big protest on the west lawn of the State House. And I just, I know we all came together for Fair Maps Day, and I'm so glad we did, but I highly encourage you to take a trip to Columbus. This is noon until 2 p.m. on the 28th. Please join us. And a big thank you to so many of you. I just appreciate the opportunity to have a conversation. A big thank you to our map makers. And thank you to Suzanne for walking us through these things, and Chris for explaining the competition. And because I plan on being around in 2031, I'm taking all these suggestions so that we can think about the next map making. And thank you all, and have a good afternoon. Once again, big thank you. Take care all. Bye, everybody. Thank you, Riley. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, John. We very much appreciate it. And thank you for those who gave comments and questions. Thank you. Bye.